So hi guys, it's Tamara Hill. I am back with a video on borderline personality disorder, and this video I think I want to talk a little bit about some of the common signs and symptoms of somebody who's struggling with borderline personality. I think the disorder is very perplexing for a lot of reasons, but I think it's mainly perplexing to other people who aren't familiar with what it is, because it almost looks, the behavior from the person almost looks manipulative. It looks intentionally manipulative. It looks controlling and dominating. And, you know, I do want to say this, that you know, and I want to say this before we go into the symptoms, but individuals who have BPD, borderline personality disorder, there is a spectrum. And this is the way that I teach it to my clients. There's a spectrum of behaviors. There's also a spectrum of characteristics. And everybody with borderline personality disorder is not the same. You might get one individual with borderline personality who's very argumentative and irritable and self-injurious and just angry, and they self-harm all the time. And then you'll get somebody in the middle of that spectrum who's very risky, and they're very dominating, and they're very emotional and passionate. And then you can get somebody on the far severe end of BPD who is very paranoid and delusional, and they hallucinate, they threaten suicide, they have engaged in, you know, severe suicide attempts. They're very dangerous and very risky. So think of borderline personality disorder as being on that spectrum. So you have somebody on the far left who's irritable, angry, and just, you know, fed up life. And then you have that person in the middle who may have all of these important as well as scary behaviors, such as, you know, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to harm myself, I'm going to do something bad to myself or you. But then you also have somebody on the far severe end who is ready for the hospital because they can't survive in society. So I think it's important to keep those behaviors in mind on that spectrum as we go along. So I know last video I talked a lot about interpersonal relationships, impulsivity, just the categories: impulsivity, interpersonal relationships, self-harm, dysphoria. That's the depression. That's that low-grade depression and hopelessness that you will find that a lot of people with borderline personality have. And I think also I mentioned the suicidal ideation and the self-harm. So we have a lot of individuals with BPD who present in clinical sessions or in clinical settings as very different. I have worked with suicidal adolescents and adults and adolescents who self-harm, and adults and adolescents who have BPD. And they have presented to me very differently. None of my clients appear the same way to me. I often have to take a different approach with each one. But the number one foundational truth that I have learned with people with borderline personality disorder is that they are incapable of getting their emotional needs met. And as a result of that, they choose behaviors or statements or actions that feel to other people as over-the-top dramatic. And it's complicated with managing their interpersonal relationships because they do things that push people away. And I think this is important for you to understand. It's important for me to keep in mind as well as a clinician that every individual with BPD has some kind of challenge with their relationships. And it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Some individuals can get treatment and therapy and be just fine. Other individuals, not so much. Sometimes medication is needed, 24/7 monitoring is needed by clinical staff. So it just depends on where that person is on that spectrum that we talked about at the beginning. But that is very important. That's one foundational truth, is that people with borderline personality disorder, they struggle with relationships in some capacity. Which will require therapy, sometimes medication. Is it always successful? Not at all. Sometimes therapy is very difficult, especially if there are other diagnoses involved, like depression or anxiety. Sometimes treatment is difficult because the other individual isn't ready to accept their diagnosis, and they're not ready to accept that they need a lot of therapy and support. And also, we also need to look at the fact that therapy can also be disregarded by people with BPD because it doesn't get their immediate need met. When the person is in a moment with another person where, you know, if they just cry, or if they just get angry, or if they just let their anger out, or if they just drive really fast and get high and drunk, you know, and not care, everything will boom change. I get my immediate need met. But if a person is in therapy, they're slowly working through things, and sometimes that's not enough. They really do, and I shouldn't say they because that's generalizing, but some people with borderline personality disorder really are impulsive, and they need that immediate gratification. And therapy just does not provide that. So sometimes therapy can be a major challenge for these individuals. So, you know, I think it's important that we keep that in mind as well, that these individuals are not just difficult because they want to be. Sometimes they are difficult because they know no other way to be. They're also difficult because they don't understand the totality of the